Hi, everyone. Welcome to the July 16th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and this week on the podcast, we are looking ahead to a major Saturday of stakes racing across the country. We've got Grade 1 events at Monmouth Park and Saratoga. We'll be focusing on those two venues on this podcast, talking about a trio of races from each of those cards, actually 3 consecutive races at each of those venues. Now, Craig, my usual co-host, is still out, but if you saw, he posted on Twitter recently that he's expecting to be back relatively soon, so we'll see whether it's in the next few weeks. I'm looking forward to having Craig back, of course. I miss him on this podcast, but I really enjoyed getting to talk to some guests over the past few weeks, and I'm actually having a returning guest on the podcast today, as joining me is a handicapper who got the Saratoga meet off to a great start yesterday with an 11-1 best bet winner. That's DRF New York handicapper Mike Beer. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, David. We had a good time the last time we did it, so looking forward to doing it again. And we got obviously a great weekend of races to look at here.
Yeah, this might be like a good luck charm for you because you had that winner yesterday. And when we were recording the podcast last time, you got home a $60 horse during our recording session. So hopefully more of the same. Let's look at these Monmouth races first. And as I said, we're going to talk about 3 races from each of these venues, Monmouth and Saratoga. At Monmouth, we're going to discuss 3 of the graded stakes races, 10 through 12, the Molly Pitcher, the United Nations, and the Haskell. Let's begin with that grade 3 event, the Molly Pitcher, that is race 10. I found this to be a super wide open race, no clear favorite. I think Mrs. Danvers is the slight favorite on the morning line, but I don't know about you. I'm just kind of sick of Mrs. Danvers. She's just never turned out to be as good as we thought she might be when she was a young horse. And if she's going to be the favorite in this race, I kind of want to find somebody else.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's so interesting to look at her on paper because I agree with you completely. I don't think she ever turned into what at one point it looked like she was going to be. I mean, we'll see if she winds up going favorite in here. I kind of hope that she does. Just because I don't want any part of this horse. So I just sort of hope that she takes some money in here. I really struggled with this race, David. I thought there were a lot of different ways to go. I think I kind of got it down to 2 horses. If I'm going to bet this race, I'm going to focus on 2 horses. One of them will be the number 3 Vault. I'll hope to get better than the 7-2 morning line on Vault, but I just sort of feel like she's maybe a little underrated. I think this is the right kind of race for Brad Cox to run her in. And she might fit this race pretty well from a pace perspective, where she can just sort of sit off it somewhere and make one run through the stretch. I don't know. I've always liked her a little bit. I want to use her, but the horse that I ultimately decided I want to have most of my money tied up with is the number 6 Bayesian Girl. And I'm just going to hope that she gets a more comfortable trip this time than she got in her most recent start over at Delaware Park. I suppose the sloppy track that day could offer some kind of an excuse for her. I don't know if she liked it or not. I was more just sort of interested when I watched that race to just feel like, the pace was fast. I don't even know if it was so much that as I thought it was. She was just never in a great position in that race, sort of keeping after a long shot. She had Miss Marissa, who just a really sort of nice and underrated horse, right to her outside and just forcing her along all the way. So to me, Bayesian Girl just never got a breather there, got tired in the stretch. I don't care that much about that race. I feel like this is a better spot for her. And I know she's going to be forward. Maybe the pace will be fast again, but I don't really feel like she's a need the lead kind of horse. I think she'll be forward and maybe just fall into a better trip this time. I think she's actually going to be an okay price in here.
Yeah, it's a really weird race because Bayesian Girl, like a lot of others in this field, has back races that make her very competitive, but almost everybody in this race is coming off a poor effort, I guess with the exception of Banksting, who I just don't think is really good enough. There is a lot of speed signed on, and I'll be interested to see how the riders choose to kind of make tactical decisions in this race because a lot of horses could go to the front end. I'm not sure exactly who the speed is going to be. Mrs. Danvers is a horse that does her best running on the front end, but she's not that fast. So I wonder if somebody else is going to be able to take it from her in the early going. So I was trying to look for a closer in this race. It's really hard to find one that you can sink your teeth into and be sure of. So I'm taking one of the many horses who's coming off poor effort, actually multiple poor efforts. And that's the number 4, Thankful. Maybe her career is just finished and maybe she's just one start away from being retired and turning into a broodmare because she probably does have a lot of broodmare value with her pedigree. But I'm going to give her one more chance. She's coming off a bit of a layoff for Pletcher. At one time, it looked like she was developing into a nice horse before things just really went off the rails with her this past winter. And her last 3 efforts have been uncompetitive. They even tried the turf last time. I think just getting a little desperate with her. And In a race like this, I'm just kind of looking for something to make me like a horse a little bit more than the recent form would suggest. And I was watching her recent workouts on XBTV, and she just seems to be working so well coming into this race. I think she's been in company with horses like Dr. Post and Mahamal, and she's been outworking them. So maybe she's just turned it around for Pletcher. And the fact that they're keeping the faith and going in another graded stakes, maybe it's a good sign. She's going to get paced to close into. Again, I can't be sure about her turning it around, but she's supposed to be a price in this race, so I made her my top pick.
I actually really like that idea because I agree with you wholeheartedly that if it's that kind of race, and I also agree with you that at one time, it looked like Thankful was actually going to be pretty good for Pletcher, and I don't know what happened in her last couple of dirt starts. The turf race I don't care about as much. Just because, except for the fact that you pointed out, it probably was a little bit of desperation for Pletcher, which could be a bad sign. I don't know what happened in her last two dirt races. She showed up with absolutely nothing, but I agree with you, man. She's going to be a price in here, and it just feels like that kind of race. You want to try to turn a horse around in a race like this one.
Let's move on to the next race at Monmouth. It is the 11th, the Grade 1 United Nations going 1 3/8 on the turf. And this is another situation where there's a horse on the morning line who's favored, who I imagine will be favored in this race that I've just never really warmed up to that much. And that's the number 1 Arklow. He has kind of broken the trend of losing long strings of races by winning 3 of his last 4 starts, which wins had been something that he had trouble compiling in the past. But he won all those races against somewhat lesser fields than he meets here. And while he won, I guess, well within himself in the Louisville last time, he's stepping up now, and he's just never the kind of horse that I want to trust at a short price.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I mean, the more I looked at this race, the more I just sort of felt like, I guess I want to say that it's more competitive and more interesting than some of the recent editions of this UN, which I thought had been, getting a little lackluster. I guess this one's a little bit better. I still thought it was hard to find, the alternatives to the 2 horses who are going to be the favorites. And that's the horse drawn to the inside, Arklow, and the horse drawn to the outside, Tribuvan. I mean, I just didn't really see anybody else that I was going to try to beat those horses with. I'm obviously afraid of the speed on the outside. You and I guess we look at Arklow a little bit differently. I've always liked this horse. I liked him going all the way back, 3 years. When they finally stretched him out, to me, the key to this horse was that they finally stretched him out. I think he's way better going longer. And you're right. He always has been a little bit of an infrequent winner. He would come up short in races where he maybe didn't have, huge excuses. But overall, I just felt like he's, acquitted himself against good horses for a really long time. I like all of his most recent races. It did feel like, the blinkers going on last fall in that race, Kentucky Downs, sort of made a difference with this horse. It got him right back on track, I think. I liked his win at Del Mar back in November, where I don't think he beat a great field that day, but I just liked the way that he won it. And I also just like, David, that he's just a really handy kind of a horse. He'll close if he has to, but he'll sit up close if the pace isn't there for him. So I just didn't think he was going to be compromised by the way the race was run. I trust him a little bit more, at least at this stage of the game. I trust him a little bit more at the longer distances than his main rival, who I guess in some ways still has something to prove as a distance kind of horse. Maybe I'm being too hard on him for that. Between the 2 of them, I think it's pretty close. I'm going to take Arklow.
Yeah, I'm being a little bit hard on Arklow. I just kind of have a vendetta against him. And he has run well in his last 4 starts, or I should say 3 of his last 4 starts. That Hollywood Turf Cup effort 2 back was actually pretty good, and he's got a right to move forward second off the layoff. He's the horse to beat in this race, and he's supposed to get pace to close into, which you can't often say in these marathon turf races. There's a lot of speed signed on, and potentially that's going to work against the number 10 Tribuvan. But I think Mike, I've been a fan of this horse, especially since he's come back as a new gelding this year. I thought he put in a huge effort last time in the Manhattan. They did what they had to do in that race. They were really aggressive. They just tried to bottom out the field, and it would have worked if domestic spending didn't turn out to be as good as he is this year. And it feels like domestic spending has really asserted himself as the top turf horse in the country between distances of 9 furlongs and 10. We'll see if he can go farther than that. But Tribuvan has taken a big step forward this year, and The distance, it is a question. He never went quite this far successfully in Europe, but he went nearly this far and seemed to get it. So I have some hope that he can do it over this flat Monmouth course where horses seem to be able to go a little bit further than they can at some other places. He does have to deal with other speed in this race, and I wonder from the outside post if they're going to try to rate him. I don't think he's a need the lead type, but he's definitely been successful being aggressive in his races with those enterprising tactics. So I would expect them to try to do the same thing. Regardless of how he runs, though, I think he's just a major player in this race. And I put him on top because I couldn't really latch on to anybody else. There are two other Chad Brown runners in here. Personally, they didn't do much for me. I guess you could try to make a case for Masterpiece, but I just think he's turned out to be a bit of a disappointment.
I agree with all that. I mean, I looked through this field a couple of different times, just trying to find the horse that I would be interested in outside of the two favorites. And ultimately, I just couldn't do it. I'm with you on Masterpiece. I thought there was a time when, maybe he was going to turn out to be okay, but I can't get behind that horse. And it's not like, he's going to get overlooked in this race. He's just going to take money in here. I guess if I was going to throw somebody else in, it would be the number 5, Fantasioso, who's going to cut all the way back from a 2-mile race. I don't know how good this horse is either, David, but, cutting back in distance a little bit could help him. And I didn't feel like in either the Elkhorn or the Louisville, I don't want to say he got bad trips. I just didn't think he got great trips in those races and maybe ran a little bit better than it looks on paper.
No, I don't disagree with that. I thought he was interesting coming out of the Louisville 2-back where he was just never really clear in the stretch. I wonder if he's really this good, but right. He's going to get plenty of pace to close into, or he's supposed to at least if the riders, ride this race the way that the PPs would suggest. So we'll see. But yeah, he's definitely one that could take advantage of that. Move on to the Grade 1 Haskell, the feature race at Monmouth Park on Saturday, race 12, going 1 1/8 for the 3-year-olds on the main track. And you've got some of the main players in the division in this race. I think that the morning line favorite, though, is clearly the horse to beat. That's the number 4, Hot Rod Charlie. A runner that seems to just keep getting better every time they lead him over. He kind of improved suddenly in that Breeders' Cup last year, but he proved that was no fluke this year, just continuing to step forward with each start. And he took the kind of step forward in the Belmont Stakes last time that suggests he might be competitive against older horses later in the year. And I don't think we've yet seen anybody else in this race ascend to that level.
It's exactly how I looked at it. I mean, it's not a big field here. I'm happy that at least we have a horse like Following C down towards the rail, just because he seems like a horse who could be really good. Obviously, he's got a lot to prove here. At the end of the day, this is a 7-horse field with a lot of filler. I thought, there were maybe 3.5 interesting horses in here. Midnight Bourbon's not really my kind of horse. I guess there's a way to make a case for him, I guess, but I would kind of be surprised if he beat this field. And ultimately, David, I just think Hot Rod Charlie, I don't want to sit here and make some sort of big stand against Mandaloun. I guess ultimately Mandaloun is going to be declared the Derby winner at some point. I've never liked Mandaloun, and I still can't find a way to get behind this horse yet. I just don't really feel like he's that good, but maybe I'll just ultimately be way wrong about that. I think Hot Rod Charlie's a much better horse than Mandaloun is, and in this race, I just feel like in a lot of ways it's Hot Rod Charlie's race to lose. I don't know why they're taking the blinkers off. This horse has been in such good form. An equipment change off of a race like the one he just ran in the Belmont, I just don't really understand that kind of stuff. But it wasn't enough to make me not want to take this horse on top. I just think he's supposed to beat this field.
Yeah, I know some people were a little bit critical of the ride in the Belmont Stakes, Flavien Prat being so aggressive out of the gate, really intent on going to the front, and he did set those really fast opening 2 fractions before they moderated things on the backstretch. So perhaps the connections kind of were a little stung by that loss, and they don't want him to be as aggressively ridden here. I was watching some of his recent workouts, and they've really been training him in company, kind of passing horses, coming from a little off the pace in his workouts. So without the blinkers, I should say. So yeah. Maybe that is the plan here. I don't know. He just seems like a horse that's doing really well right now. And regardless of tactics, I expect him to get it done here. Like you, I've never been the biggest fan of Mandaloun. I still struggle to fathom where that Derby performance came from because I didn't like his races at the fairgrounds that much. And he did run well in the Derby. He got a good trip, a very good trip, like many other horses in that race, Hot Rod Charlie included. But he did beat that one with similar journeys. So, I mean, I guess somewhere in him, he's got a race to be competitive. I just think Hot Rod Charlie's gotten better since then. And yeah, as for the other two alternatives, Following Sea and Midnight Bourbon, I mean, Following Sea is the real wild card in this race. I guess it's a good sign that they're being so aggressive running him here. I just don't really view him as the kind of horse that's going to relish 9 furlongs.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That's a real question for this horse. I'm just really interested. Obviously, he's a talented horse. I mean, you can tell when you watch him run that this horse has a ton of ability. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I guess it's a really good sign that this is where Pletcher elects to run him off of a really easy allowance when sprinting. That alone got me interested in him, as well as the fact that at the end of the day, outside of Hot Rod Charlie and I guess Mandaloon, there's really not that much in here. I guess Rosario will just come out running, go to the lead with this horse. I personally don't, love the idea of Hot Rod Charlie all of a sudden being turned into a horse that they want to take off the pace and try to win races that way. I guess they have to start doing that at some point, but I don't know that it's a great idea to try to change his running style off of what was clearly a career best effort last time. I don't know. Maybe Following Sea goes to the lead and wires this field. I would never bet Following Sea in this race. I think Hot Rod Charlie's supposed to be too good for him, but I'm very interested to see what he does because I think there's a chance he's a really good horse.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a chance that he is really talented. I know they had been talking about potentially entering this race for a long time. I was still a little surprised to see him actually running here. I figured they'd try a different spot. Yeah, Hot Rod Charlie, way the horse to be. I kind of agree with you. I wasn't thrilled with Mandaloon's Pegasus. I might try to, if I was playing this race, I might try to get him out of the exacta and use Following Sea or even Midnight Bourbon underneath. But I don't view either of them as win candidates.
Right.
Let's move over to Saratoga, and we're going to discuss 3 consecutive races there, races 8 through 10, beginning with a non-winners of one allowance race that has to be one of the strongest of that variety that I've ever seen. You've got some horses coming out of Graded Stakes Company, returning from layoffs in here, some very impressive recent maiden winners, and I think you have to start the conversation there with those 2 horses that bookend the field, Bo Liam, who's drawn the rail, and Mahamal drawn on the outside. I mean, they ran speed figures in their debut, or I should say their maiden victories, that suggests that they're almost certain to be in Graded Stakes eventually.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is such a good race, and I was actually shocked because when I first started going through the race, I just saw Bo Liam, who's drawn to the rail. He's the first horse you see, and I wasn't obviously familiar with him. I didn't see his debut when it happened. So before I even went through the rest of the field, I just looked up his maiden win, watched the replay of it just to see, and then just looked at the field he was running against. And after I was done watching it, I was like, wow, I'm not picking against this horse. He's gonna win. He's gonna win this race. He was really, really good breaking his maiden. He was so professional doing it too. I liked everything about it. And then you start going through the field and you wind up on page 2 and then page 3, and you're like, oh, this is like an unbelievable allowance race like you never see. So now you can't just concede the race to Bo Liam. There's a lot of different horses that can win here. I expect Bo Liam to run well. I liked everything about his debut last time. I ultimately went with the other horse, or the one that you mentioned in the open, Mahamal, just because this horse has run twice. He's drawn to the outside as opposed to the inside, and he has the feeling of a horse who's just going to turn out to be really good for Pletcher. Even his career debut was a really good performance. A race where I personally think if he wasn't so green in that race, he probably would have won and beaten a really good horse and first captain in doing so. So. I don't know. I think he ran well first time out. He obviously took a big step forward last time. You don't have to worry about the 7 furlongs for this horse. Those things just all pointed me to him. I know he's the favorite, so I'm not, breaking any ground here in a race that, is going to be more wide open probably than just taking the 2 favorites. But I like the 12 and the 1 in here. I think these are 2 really good horses.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your take on the post position draw because, for me, when I was making the line in this race, I easily could have flip-flopped those 2 if they had drawn opposite post positions. It just feels like maybe some people might perceive the rail as being a negative for Bo Liam, given that there is other speed in this race. And Ricardo Santana is almost forced to go from there and try to make the front end. I think with a horse like that, you do want to hold your position down inside. And Mahamal, while he's been on the front end in his 2 starts, it does seem like he's a little more tractable than Bo Liam. Bolium. He's not the kind of horse that's dragging you into the race. He kind of has to be asked to get there a little bit. So I'd imagine he'll get that stalking trip that you would prefer, that Pletcher does often prefer on the outside. I mean, they both run really well. Personally, I was a little more impressed by Bolium, kind of like you, and I did give him the slight edge in this race. And I do think he has the ability to do it on the front end. It's just not going to be easy.
Yeah, agreed. Overall, I think post positions and like digging too deep into post positions and trying to figure out what's going to happen is probably an overrated angle to spend too much time on. In a big field like this one, it could be problematic for this horse to break from the rail. Obviously, if he doesn't break sharply, it could be a problem. All those things, but those are the kinds of things you can't really anticipate. So we'll see if it affects him at all. I just from watching his debut, I don't think he's a slow horse by any stretch of the imagination. He certainly has good speed. He showed good speed in his debut. He broke from the outside that day. But he was just so handy in there. I mean, he could have been on the lead if Santana wanted him to be. But this horse was just, perfectly content to sit off of another horse. And not only that, while they were on the backstretch, another horse sort of made an earlier run to his inside. And this horse was just unfazed by it. He just sat there. He didn't get into the bit. He just sat and waited, and then he blew that field away through the stretch. This horse is really good. I don't really feel like there's that much between him and the 12 at all in here. We'll see how they bet the race. To me, that's going to be the most interesting thing, just to see how they bet it.
And now, what do we make of the other horse that's likely to take money in this race, the number 10 Crowded Trade? This has just always been kind of a confusing horse for me to assess. I mean, I guess the temptation is to say that a turn back for a horse like this is going to be successful because he won his debut sprinting. He ran so well in the one-turn Gotham. But I'm not sure if he ran so poorly in those two-turn races or if they just asked a little too much of a lightly raced horse.
Yeah, I think that would be maybe the right way to look at him, is just to feel like, his wood and then the Preakness, obviously they think he's a good horse. So you run in those races, I guess, but maybe it was asking too much. Personally, David, and I don't, maybe you don't agree with this. I didn't think he ran well in the wood at all. And that made it even more surprising to see him entered in the Preakness, where obviously, I just thought he was terrible in the Preakness, but there were a lot of horses who were terrible in the Preakness. I don't know. I maybe it was just asking too much. At this stage of the game, I'm just happy to look at him as a horse who is just going to be better going shorter. His debut was a really nice performance. He was very green in that race, but I really liked the way, once he leveled off there in the stretch, I liked the way he ran that last furlong to, gun that field down. That was a good performance. And listen, he hasn't been in a one-turn race since he ran a 95 in the Gotham, and he just got beat. And as it turns out, even though he lost a race that maybe he should have won, as it turns out, Wayburn's a really nice horse.
Yeah, when I was first looking at this race, I was thinking I was going to pick Crowded Trade, fast pace, turn back, all things that I like. But I feel like the two horses we just talked about, Mahamel and Bolium, are potentially grade 1 horses. And I'm just not sure I believe that about Crowded Trade yet. I think this is kind of a pivotal race for him. He's got to really show that he can get back to one of his better efforts here. And he's going to need to if he's going to be successful. Is there anybody else in here that you think is interesting? I mean, we're focusing so much on 3 horses and it's such a deep and loaded race, but I feel like the others, they all do have to step up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I almost sort of feel bad for some of the other horses in here who, showed up in an entry-level allowance race, and they wind up against these two horses who I personally agree with you. I think they could both be grade 1 horses. So, I mean, it's a tough position for them to be in. I guess if I was going to use anybody else, and I'll admit I gave a pretty long look and thought about putting the number 5, 10 for 10 on top for Shug. I think 7 for 1 could be a good distance for him. I guess there's a chance he's going to catch a wet track in this race, and I guess that could also help him. I'm struggling to decide how good he actually is, because his one, fast race there came the last time we saw him in the Remsen, and in the form of that race. I guess you could go either way on it. A lot of horses haven't really done anything out of it, but Known Agenda was a far back in third there, and he's improved since then. I don't know. I think this horse is okay. I like him going 7 furlongs off the layoff.
Let's move on to the 9th race, the Grade 3 Sanford for the 2-year-olds. It's drawn a large field of 12 runners for this Sanford. Usually we see much smaller fields in these early summer stakes races for the 2-year-olds. This, though, is one where it feels like the ability is really concentrated down towards the inside. The number 1, Wit, was very impressive, winning his debut on Belmont Stakes Day. The number 2, Candy Landing, also an impressive debut winner. He won his race at Churchill Downs on the front end. Feels like those two might be okay. There are a lot of other horses here that could improve. It just feels like they really do have to take a step forward to get on terms with that pair.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same. I mean, I just ultimately, when I was done looking at this race, I was just really disappointed with it overall. I mean, we're almost at the point now where I don't even see the necessity of running these graded stakes races for 2-year-olds in the summer, at least in New York anymore. These guys, the trainers just don't support these races. This is an entry-level allowance race. All of these horses are 2 life eligible. They're all only have a maiden win. 9 of these horses are coming off of debut wins. This is an allowance race. The 2 horses down to the inside, I thought they both ran well. I was really taken with Witt's debut win. I thought he overcame a little bit of adversity to win it, and he won it very impressively. I suspect he's going to be really hard for this field to beat if he takes any kind of a step forward. And I have no problem with Candy Landing, who, as you mentioned, sort of up on the pace in there. He had good speed. I appreciate the fact that he beat, the second, third, and fourth place finishers of his debut. Already had experience, so he beat horses who had already been on the track before, and he beat them under a pretty confident ride. I mean, I really liked the way he won that race. I personally thought it was hard to get behind any of the other horses in here.
Yeah, I personally like Witt quite a bit more than Candy Landing. It does feel like there's plenty of speed in this race, and Witt showed in his debut that he can come from off the pace. I don't know if he necessarily has to be as far back as he was that day because he didn't break that well, and you'd hope he's more professional this time. But I saw real ability in Witt for the debut. Candy Landing, I mean, he was good in his debut. He's just going to have to fend off plenty of other speed that's drawn to his outside. It could be a tough trip for him, but he definitely also has some ability. I mean, the only other 2 horses that I remotely considered were the number 7 Ottoman Empire, who's coming out of a slow race, but at least he showed that he could come from off the pace, and the number 9 Headline Report for Wesley Ward, a horse who has just kind of been missing for the past 3 months after looking pretty good in his debut at Keeneland. I mean, stretching out from 4.5 to 6 furlongs is no small feat, but Wesley Ward does seem to be dangerous with his 2-year-olds.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you always have to respect the Wesley Wards. I don't know where this horse has been. That's a very good point. He's another horse who, I mean, you suspect he's just going to show speed in here. And as you've already mentioned, there's a lot of pace that he's going to have to deal with as he comes off the layout. But maybe this horse is good. I don't know. The only other horse that I might try to throw in there somewhere, and who should be a really big price, is the 11 Seize the Night. He's another horse who comes out of a pretty slow race. The only thing I want to give him a little bit of credit for is not only winning first out for Dallas Stewart, but he did some good things in that race after not being able to make the lead. He was beaten to the front. His rider just sort of had to take a hold of him there. He got stuck behind horses and steadied. I just thought he did well to hold position in that race, then get to the outside and still, get up at the end to win. Obviously he has to improve off that race, but it's not like he had some kind of soft trip when he broke his maiden first time out.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the same things in that race. That looks like the kind of race that he should be able to build off of. It seemed like his rider was trying to ride 2 other horses during the race, trying to keep some other guys in, but he eventually got there. But all these horses that we're talking about that are not drawn down in those 2 rail positions, they're going to have to take a step forward to beat those 2 inside drawn runners. Let's finish things up on this podcast by talking about the Grade 1 feature on Saturday at Saratoga. It's the Diana going 1 1/8 on the inner turf course for the fillies and mares. And this is one where the concentration of talent is really drawn towards the outside in the second half of the gate, as you kind of have to make the decision whether you prefer the horses coming out of the Grade 1 Just a Game on Belmont Stakes Day, or whether you want the horses that raced in that Beaugay in early May at Belmont, because both seem like strong races. The Just a Game, though, not sure that it was quite as talented a field that we've seen in some past Just a Games.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. And I don't want to be too hard on any of those horses, and certainly the 1-2 finishers who were sort of new faces over on this side of the country for a very good trainer, obviously. I mean, they both ran well in the Just a Game. I don't really want to knock those 2 horses. I just don't know how I feel about the race overall. And kind of just wanted the Beaugay horses. I think in a particular, David, I think we kind of looked at the race the same way. I just felt like Harvey's Little Goyle, there are a lot of reasons, I think, to be positive on her, even though she was defeated last time, going a little bit longer in the New York. I just think there are reasons to stick with her in this race. She's so versatile. You can just do whatever you want with her. She'll get a good trip in this race. And I personally have always believed this, and I believe it even more now after the New York. I really don't think she wants to go that far. I really feel like she's a better sort of, I guess you could call it a middle distance turf horse, maybe from a mile to a mile and an eighth. I don't really feel like she wants to go much farther than that.
Yeah, the way that I viewed that in New York is that it was kind of like a mile and a half race that was a mile and a quarter because, I mean, she was actually in it until the eighth pole, Harvey's Low Oil. And then it seemed like stamina became really important in that final furlong. I mean, the only horses that were doing any running at the end of that race were Mean Mary, Thundering Knights, and My Sister Nat, all horses that can go longer than a mile and a quarter. So I just felt like it wasn't as bad of a performance by Harvey's Low Oil as it seems. And I mean, she ran really well in that Bogey first off the layoff, and that performance kind of suggested that she'd come back as the exact same horse, or perhaps even better than what we had seen in the Breeders' Cup last year. And if she can rebound here, I do think she's the horse to beat. And I don't know, maybe she'll be vying for favoritism. I think she should be. I just thought she was likely to get a good trip and might be the best horse anyway, so I put her on top as well.
Yeah, that's exactly how I looked at the race. I agree with all those things. Maybe she'll be favored. I don't know how they'll actually wind up betting the race. You probably have it right the way you made the morning line. But I'm with you. I feel like in a lot of ways she should be the favorite in here. She has the credentials to be the favorite. She's come back perfectly fine as a 4-year-old, and now she's cutting back third off the lap. I mean, I just really like this horse. I think they can do whatever they want with her. And that's maybe the sort of thing that you can't really say about some of the other horses in here who, some of them obviously still have a lot to prove, and some of them might just need to get the right trip in order to come out on top.
Yeah, and Lamista, who I kind of did tentatively settle on as the morning line favorite in this race, I mean, she arguably has more to prove than these other three horses, I should say, that are likely to take money, because she doesn't have that victory in the United States. And personally, I never thought she was getting by Harvey's Low Oil in the Bogey. Right. She did make a stronger move through the final quarter mile. She was finishing best of all at the end, but it never felt like that victory was in doubt for the winner. And I mean, it's a good sign that Chad Brown is only starting 2 runners in this race, and this is the one that he put Irad on, and it kind of feels like he wants to win the Diana with this horse, and it's a race that he obviously covets. He's won it, I think, 5 times in a row and going for his 6th. But I don't know. I feel like she does have to take a step forward.
Yeah, I think we look at her exactly the same way. She ran perfectly well in the Bogey. It was a really nice stateside debut for her. I agree with you in that, she was gaining ground at the end, but I didn't think she was ever catching the winner in there. And, I realized that you could just say, well, the pace wasn't that fast. Harvey's Little Girl got right up on it. And so, had the better trip. She sat right up close and she stayed on, and this horse was compromised a little bit. Personally, I thought Lamista got a really, really good ride from Irad that day. Gave her best chance to win, and she came out second best. Maybe she'll turn the tables this time. I don't know. But if she's the favorite and Harvey's Little Girl isn't, I want the other horse.
Now, Mike, I know you were a little bit interested in one of the bigger prices in this race, because the focus really is on those 4 horses that are likely to vie for favoritism. So if you can get another one in there, that's going to inject some value into the exotics.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I thought about trying to get the number 3 Magic Attitude in there. I guess ultimately, David, I don't know that cutting back to 9 furlongs is necessarily a great thing for her. Maybe she just wants to go longer, but I don't know. I think this is a fine distance for her. I guess ultimately, I just feel like the New York last time where she didn't run a step. I just feel like the yielding turf course there probably really worked against her. And that's a problem because I guess it's supposed to rain here, pretty well all day tomorrow, at least at this point. So another yielding turf course isn't going to do her any favors. But if she catches ground that's anywhere near firm, I'm just going to try to get her in there because I just like this horse. I think she's run several good races. Her Sheepshead Bay wasn't against this kind of competition, but I like the way that she won that race with a big late finish. I think Castellano in this race can just sit back, save some ground with her, and then just try to make one run through the stretch. And maybe get a piece of this thing at a price against some horses who they're going to be shorter prices and I'm just not sure about them. I don't know how good some of these horses are.
Yeah, and I hope that the weather that's supposed to come through does hold off to some extent, because if this race is run over a soft turf course like it looks like it could be, that could really change things. And that would probably make it pretty likely that Chad Brown gets his 6th Diana win in a row, because both of his horses, Pocket Square and Lamista, have won over bottomless ground in Europe. So that is something to note if the weather does change the turf course quite a bit.
Correct.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate you making the time to come on the podcast today. I know it's a busy week with opening weekend at Saratoga. You had a good day yesterday. I wish you best of luck for the rest of the meet.
Yeah, you too, David. Thanks for having me on again. I had a good time once again.
Everybody, remember you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in today, and thanks to Mike, and make sure to tune in to the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.